Tonight, inflection point.
Decisions we make today will have far-reaching impacts on the world we leave to our children tomorrow.
The president's trip to Asia begins in South Korea, even as challenges from China and North Korea take center stage. Plus, supreme threats.
We can't let that in any way intimidate our federal judges or the rest of us.
The danger to Supreme Court justices ahead of a final decision over abortion. And a dwindling biblical worldview.
This is an opportunity, a wake-up call for the church.
The role parents play in fostering faith. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Strengthening ties with allies in Asia. Good evening in Washington, D.C. I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, the president is in South Korea, emphasizing the importance of U.S. allies in the region. He's also underscoring the danger over repeated North Korean missile tests and heightening tensions between China and Taiwan.
So much of the future of the world is going to be written here in the Indo-Pacific over the next several decades. We're standing at an inflection point in history.
President Biden opening his trip by highlighting supply chain issues and touching on the war in Ukraine. This as the computer chip shortage sends ripples through the global economy. Increasing that chip supply is one of Biden's key domestic priorities. Just one factor in the soaring inflation infecting nearly every sector of the economy. And joining us now for more is Anthony Ruggiero, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Anthony, welcome. Great to have you with us this evening. So given its place in the global economy, South Korea's new president wants the country to be a player on the world stage. How are issues with neighbors like China and North Korea complicating that ambition?
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, South Korea is a top 10 global economy. They want to be a global player. But as you said, I think issues closer to home, China, the relationship that they have with Japan, and North Korea always looms large when it comes to South Korea. So I think he wants to be a global player, but I think the local issues in that region will dominate his presidency.
Yeah. North Korea testing missiles and threatening to ramp up its nuclear program. Anthony, what is Kim Jong-un's objective here? What does he want?
Well, the first objective for him is always to make sure these weapons work. And then another objective is always to try and intimidate us, both the United States and South Korea and Japan. But what we really need to do is respond. Kim Jong-un is a little too comfortable. He likes the status quo right now, notwithstanding the COVID pandemic he has to address, which doesn't really affect him. But we have to respond with sanctions, respond with military drills, and make sure he understands that we retain deterrence. And that if he does anything, that there will be a response.
You mentioned sanctions and different things. How should the Biden administration respond to his threats so that Kim Jong-un knows the United States is serious?
Right. I mean, when it comes to sanctions, they're basically inadequate and infrequent. They're almost non-existent. The bottom line is it started at the end of the previous administration, which I was there for. And has continued into this administration. North Korea is not interested in talking. The only thing that's going to work right now is a little bit of pressure to make sure that he feels a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. So the war in Ukraine, we've seen it really unify and strengthen NATO and the members against Russia and any other actor. It's not a hot war, but can this alliance have the same impact reining in China's ambitions in that region?
Well, I think that's what Biden wants. He's going to meet individually with South Korea and Japan, that he's going to have the second in-person meeting with the group called the Quad, which is Japan, Australia, United States, and India. That he's also going to announce a framework, a new Indo-Pacific framework. So he's trying to provide a counterweight to China. But a lot of these allies have seen it before from many administrations, unfortunately. So they're going to want to see the substance, not necessarily just the rhetoric.
All right, Anthony Ruggiero with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. A lot to talk about in these very uncertain times. We appreciate you coming on Faith Nation tonight. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.
Well, to the southern border, as illegal immigration swells to levels never seen before in the United States, the fate of a pandemic-era policy looms. Ending Title 42, which will allow millions more migrants into the United States. A ruling is expected any day by a federal judge who's temporarily kept the policy in place. CBN's Tara Mergener has more on this escalating crisis.
The numbers are in, and April a historic high. DHS recorded more than 234,000 immigrants at the U.S.-Mexico border, the most in agency history, and a 114% increase from this time a year ago.
By all accounts, the numbers will skyrocket to new heights with the end of Title 42. Last month, nearly 97,000 people who illegally entered the U.S. were expelled under the Trump-era pandemic policy, aimed at slowing the spread of COVID. The Biden administration wants to end it next week, fulfilling a promise to revoke the public health directive when no longer needed.
Is it safe to rescind Title 42?
I think given the level of infection at the time, which is right now, that I think that the CDC decision was a reasonable decision.
But several states have filed suit to keep Title 42 in place, arguing the administration is not following proper procedure to end it, and that Border Patrol will be further overrun.
As long as we continue to release people into the United States, reward them for violating our laws, they're going to continue to come.
The main focus of this administration after Title 42 is to detain people in these facilities along the border. And then when those facilities fill up, they're planning on releasing them onto the streets in border cities.
Mayorkas himself admits the end of Title 42 will cause a new wave of migration. The health order has been used nearly 2 million times to keep migrants from entering this country.
That does not mean that the border is open beginning on May 23rd. We continue to enforce the laws of this country.
Agents pleading for more manpower and technology to deal with the ever-increasing numbers since Biden took office are bracing for as much as a threefold surge. Mayorkas insists the U.S. is ramping up personnel, efficiency, and enforcement to handle it.
The preparation of which began in September of last year. We knew very well that the CDC's Title 42 authority would not be around forever.
As migrants continue to fan out into communities across the country, Border Patrol is also warning about a growing security risk, saying illegal traffic has shifted from primarily family units to single adults, including drug smugglers and other criminals now more easily able to slip by outnumbered agents.
New polls show 58% of Americans disapprove of the way Biden is handling the border crisis. In Washington, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Tara. Well, meanwhile, at the Supreme Court, America's top law enforcement agency is bracing for a surge of violence and unrest in the wake of a decision involving Roe v. Wade. Many are expecting the court's conservative majority to overturn the landmark decision which legalized abortion nationwide in 1973. Now, the Department of Homeland Security says domestic extremists have adopted the narrative surrounding abortion as their own. National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke has more on this.
The threats began just after the leak of Justice Samuel Alito's draft opinion on overturning Roe v. Wade earlier this month. Social media users then began threatening to storm the Supreme Court, burn it down, and murder justices and their clerks. Not long after, this fence went up.
The good men and women at Homeland Security have been right before, and I have to assume they're right in this case. And so the threat level has increased significantly since that draft was improperly released. But we can't let that in any way intimidate our federal judges and or the rest of us.
A DHS memo warns that a broad spectrum of domestic extremists are adopting the narratives surrounding abortion rights. And while abortion-related violence is historically associated with those who oppose abortion, threats are now also coming in from those on the pro-choice side.
These are the same radical groups who want to transform fundamentally the American society. And our society was originally built as a freedom-loving, God-loving society.
Protests surrounding abortion rights have largely been peaceful. However, the office of a pro-life organization in Wisconsin was recently vandalized and damaged by fire. This message left on the building's wall. Experts worry the recent mass shooting in Buffalo, New York, also has implications on the potential violence surrounding a Roe decision.
They're misinformed. They're listening to the mainstream media who are feeding those types of violence and disinformation about abortion, about all of this stuff. And yes, there's a risk here that people like that are going to stoke further, not just disagreements, but actually foment unrest and violence.
The Department of Homeland Security says it remains committed to protecting Americans' right to peacefully protest and will continue to work with its law enforcement partners to ensure no acts of violence are committed. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. And joining us now, national political reporter for The Hill, Julia Manchester. Julia, good to see you this Friday. How much of an issue will abortion become this November and the midterm elections? Democrats, of course, hoping to keep it alive until then, but, there's still 6 months to go.
Yeah, it's unclear right now, Jenna. We know that this is a galvanizing factor for Democrats, especially when they're looking to really enthuse their base, get swing voters, and really come up with some sort of a message. We know that Democrats have a messaging problem, as Republicans have been quite successful with messaging on inflation, crime, and the border. Now, I will note there does seem to be some sort of a disconnect between the Republican establishment on Capitol Hill and many in the pro-life or anti-abortion movement. It seems like those in that movement would love abortion, obviously, to be a top issue. However, when talking to a lot of Republicans on the Hill, they say it varies from district to district, but inflation, crime, and the border are the top issues that their candidates, they believe, should be talking about.
Yeah. On the border, Julie, you just mentioned Title 42 expires Monday. Any word if the Biden administration might at all be looking to keep it intact? Reports are as many as 18,000 immigrants could come across the border each day if it's lifted. Surely this has got to be a huge concern for the White House.
It absolutely, I think, is a concern, the situation at the border, but it seems like the Biden administration believes that repealing this pandemic era policy is the best way forward. Now, what they replace it with is another question. We do know that a lot of the critics of repealing Title 42 have said, if you repeal it, that's one thing, but make sure it's replaced with something that can help stem the flow or at least keep some pressure off of Border Patrol and law enforcement at the southern border.
Yeah. Do you think the immigration issue will weigh pretty heavily in the midterm elections?
Absolutely. And I think you see a lot of at-risk lawmakers, such as Senator Mark Kelly in Arizona, Maggie Hassan, a senator from New Hampshire, Congressman Henry Cuellar, who's facing a tough primary runoff just next week. They've talked quite a bit about the border and the need to secure the border and very much address the situation there. So I think it's an issue that Republicans can try to use to put Democrats on the defensive.
Julia, polling from the Associated Press shows President Biden's approval rating at a new low, 39%. This time last year, that same poll had him at 63%. Of course, he's in Asia this weekend. Julia, when he's facing crisis after crisis here at home, could this trip score him any goodwill with the American public?
It could potentially lead to a bump in the polls. That's always something we watch out for. However, his presence in Asia is obviously a foreign policy issue. We do know that here back in the United States, inflation is a major issue. Crime's a major issue. The baby formula crisis, also a big issue. And, Democrats and Republicans can argue about whose fault that is, But ultimately, when voters go to the polls in November, they're going to blame the party or the person at the top, and that's President Biden. So, if Biden wants to reverse this trend in poor polling, I think he needs to do something domestically, get something domestic on the books. And I think Democrats, at least down ballot, are hoping abortion can be something that can really galvanize their own base and sort of offset these losses that the president's party normally faces during their first midterm election.
All right, Julia Manchester, national political reporter with The Hill. Always good to see you. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend.
You too.
And coming up, less than a week after the massacre in Buffalo, the DOJ is announcing new guidelines to combat hate crimes. Following last weekend's massacre in Buffalo, New York, the Justice Department is announcing new guidelines, grants, and steps to raise awareness about hate crimes across the country. The DOJ is investigating the Buffalo massacre as a hate crime and an act of racially motivated violent extremism.
We now gather in the wake of a horrific and painful reminder of the urgency and importance of this task. 6 days ago in Buffalo, 10 people were killed, another 3 were injured, an entire community was terrorized.
Attorney General Merrick Garland unveiling $10 million in new federal grant money to be put towards programs aimed at addressing hate crimes. It's official. The CDC is now recommending the Pfizer booster shot for kids 5 to 11 years old at least 5 months after their initial shot.
The clinical trials did show an excellent safety profile. The side effects seen with this booster dose in this age group were very similar to those seen with, let's say, the flu vaccine, soreness at the injection site, in some cases, some headache, fever, chills. Again, 0 serious safety signals in clinical trials.
This comes as COVID-19 cases are on the rise, averaging nearly 100,000 a day. That's up 22% compared to last week. The CDC is now recommending masks indoors again. And now to Ukraine, where President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia has destroyed the industrial Donbas region. Tonight, he's also accusing Russia of killing as many Ukrainians as possible. New video shows the impact of the war. Footage taken from a medic's body cam smuggled from Mariupol shows wounded soldiers from both sides getting treatment. Yesterday, Zelensky told a group of Ukrainian students that the final stage of the war will be the most difficult and bloodiest. For that reason, he says he can't call citizens to come home back yet. Up next, a wake-up call for parents. Why the foundation of a strong faith begins at home. Welcome back. 67% of American parents with preteens identify as Christian. Of that number, though, only 2% have a biblical worldview. Purdy Carter has more on the new study that should be a wake-up call for the church.
Most of the parents of young children in America today, if they were to die today, probably would not wind up in heaven.
It's a bold statement stemming from a study led by esteemed Christian researcher Dr. George Barna. It suggests American parents are experiencing a dilemma.
Most people die with the same worldview, in essence, that they had at the age of 13.
That's why Barna is concerned in stressing the importance of sharing a Christian worldview with children. The study found while 67% of American parents with preteens identify as Christian, only 2% actually possess a biblical worldview.
They don't believe the Bible is reliable or true or relevant to their lives. They don't have the same view of God as is given to us in the Bible.
I mean, it's very sobering from a Christian perspective and Christian worldview. It's sad, yet it's not a surprise.
The numbers show only 1% of this parent group in Catholic and mainline Protestant churches have a biblical worldview, compared to just 9% in evangelical, charismatic, and non-denominational churches.
It's been on the decline for more than 25 years now, and it's getting down into the very low single digits with each succeeding adult generation.
As millennial parents become the majority, Barna worries those numbers could get worse, as they're seen as being least likely to have and share a Christian lens.
This is a generation that needs a lot of attention and a lot of help. They don't respond well to somebody saying, but the Bible says, or trying to force biblical principles upon them. What they do relate better to are conversations, non-judgmental, non-threatening conversations.
The study points to a number of reasons for this result, including no-fault divorce, secularization of news, art, and entertainment. It adds that public schools and governmental laws foster a culture where wisdom and biblical truth have little room to grow.
Really, culture's done a great job of messaging the fact that, hey, let's just live free and limitless and let's just be happy. You have the right for things for yourself. And we've created ultimately a really consumer-focused culture.
Dr. Danny Huerta with Focus on the Family is dedicated to helping families know and grow in their relationship with Jesus Christ.
This is an opportunity, a wake-up call for the church to make sure we're teaching the truth in Scripture and going back to that, to the principles and believing everything that the Word of God says is true. No one has disproved it to be wrong.
For parents who feel like they're falling short in this area, Huerta recommends to intentionally enter faith-based conversations with your kids, learn what biblical boundaries look like, and implement them. And he adds, it's going to take practice.
So a book I wrote is 7 Traits of Effective Parenting, and that's based off of research on what a parent can focus in on rather than trying to control a child or trying to take ownership of a child's behaviors. It's about influence, and that begins with you.
Does that mean that Christianity is going to go away in American culture? And to make that argument, you would have to believe that God has given up on America. And yet the reality is we have a remnant of about 15 million adults across the country who possess a biblical worldview. That's a huge remnant. So God could certainly use them to turn around this culture.
Brody Carter, CBN News.
When we come back, a good deed goes viral. Why this Regent University grad is now a TikTok star. Finally tonight, looking your best. A video shot during a graduation ceremony at Regent University is going ultra viral. Take a look. Harrison Kramer is a graduate of Regent himself. Every year he goes to commencement armed with a tote bag and mirrors. He holds up the mirrors for grads as they're getting ready to walk for their diplomas. They have to look their best. This year his act of kindness was caught on camera and made it to TikTok. And it's now gained nearly 40 million views on TikTok and on Instagram. Kramer's good deed even landed him an interview with CBS Morning News. He says it's been wonderful to hear from old friends and classmates. And good for him. Well, that's going to do it for Faith Nation. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a great weekend.